Okay. How's everybody doing? You're all right. Everybody can hear me all right? Coming through well. Okay, cool. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about bass stuff again. More bass. All day bass. All day bass everything. Yeah, I had everything ready to go, and then as I was hitting start the stream, my computer just, the fan sped up and then it just turned off. That was fucking so cool. I was so stoked. Anyway, so sorry about being a little late tonight. You know, it's kind of the vibe with things sometimes. All right, so we're going to be using bass samplers today. We're going to be talking about granulator. Might be using some polygon stuff. Probably will. But we're going to be like talking about resampling and shit as well. I have a session open that I did. It's kind of just like a little dub, but it's pretty much just me kind of using bass resamples and stuff. In the original stream, I think I did kind of like a lo-fi track for like actual bass sampling, like real electric bass. And so I was like kind of reorganizing a bunch of those samples and shit. So we're going to go through some of that stuff today as well. And we're just going to be talking about, you know, different techniques to kind of do this stuff with. Yeah, so if you haven't gotten the materials, that stuff's up in the Discord, so you can go cop that. Yeah, especially with Streamlabs, shit does happen. And with Mac specifically too. So it's a wild world out there. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with granular synthesis, I guess you can check earlier streams. Pretty sure I have all those ones up. And then you can also read through some of this stuff as well. You know, so there's a ton of stuff to do granular resynthesis and synthesis in general. So resynthesizing, you know, material from source audio, you know, using grains as like a waveform for an oscillator or something like that. So you can use Granulator 2, which should be free with the Max for Live stuff. Granulizer and FL Studio, Maelstrom, Absinthe. Those are kind of the big ones. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Absinthe a little bit more pretty soon. That'll be 201 shit, so I'm going to be kind of flying through this. All right, so there's a bunch of shit we're going to be talking about today, and it's going to be kind of like around this. So we're going to be doing FM sampling, 808s, subs, stuff like that, lo-fi bass sampling, you know, so kind of like the, you know, using like a stand-up bass note and using that like in a sampler and like playing a bass line with that. Really easy to make lo-fi hip-hop that way. There's also, you know, Contact, all the other shit we talked about in 101, with just using the players and stuff. So that's, you know, definitely an option. So yeah, try all that shit out. Okay, so ton of stuff to talk about today, so we're just going to kind of move through it, especially since I'm a little later. I'm going to kind of try to get through it as quick as possible. All right, so let's make sure you can hear this. Should be good. Should be all good to go. Grains equal gains. Yo, real talk there. All right, so this should be fine. Might be a little loud. We'll see. Okay, so yeah, that is a big one, big old bass line. So this is just a resample on this one. Um, have like a couple different like things I was trying out with like samplers and stuff, but this was a resample I made during one of my streams actually. Yes, this one's gonna be really hard when I fill it in. Um, so that's kind of how I start dubs every now and then. Is I'll do kind of like I was doing on Tuesday with doing show me your fucking donk. Uh, good one. Um, but yeah, so just designing basses and recording them. That is bass sampling slash resampling 101. And so like that's something that is at like every level pretty much just like basic, I guess, where you could load up a preset or whatever, tweak it, record it, and then you got a bunch of random sounds to kind of mess with here. Um, but yeah, there's like a couple things that I think about when I'm doing this type of stuff, especially, to actually make it work. So we're gonna kind of go through a bunch of just tricks with audio right now on how to like manipulate this stuff because I feel like this is also really really crucial. Um, yeah, so I make entire songs this way sometimes. Like a lot of stuff on my first album, I guess, with Anti-Negative and Darkened was all pretty much bass resamples, including the main like square wave bass on like the drop because it like builds during the drop into like a B section that that was kind of layered on top of another sub. I believe that was a like operator patch or whatever that I was using as kind of like the main bass line, and then using bass resamples like this as kind of like a top bass mid-range kind of thing. So that's just a really common practice. I'm sure you've seen a ton of like different neuro streams or whatever where they do that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's super beneficial for literally every style of music. So just kind of going through this bass here that all the Big L resamples. So pretty much everything is played in one kind of key. So most of these samples aren't even repitched at all. I might turn on warping just so I can go and like kind of reshape some of the stuff, but it's usually played around one note. So this one is kind of around like E or F around there. Um, and I was kind of like, yeah, I think I was doing donks at the time. So, I have a bunch of different kind of lines here that are all in the same key that I can go and repiece together and kind of create like a cohesive phrase with that. That's kind of like the whole thing. It's like I line it up on the downbeat, and then you can kind of like piece that together with the rhythm of the drums and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so there's a ton of shit you can do on top of that though, like making shit uniform. Like I've heard people ask me like specifically about that, where you know, um, how to get stuff to kind of like cohesively work together. So I repurpose a lot of these bass samples in order to get it to flow together, and this is something I do like in every different style. And that's not just for bass resamples. I'll do that for like a vocal line. I'll do it for a melody line, whatever. Cool thing to do is like speed it up. Like if you have like an overarching melody or whatever like that, you can like speed it up and have it happen like within half a bar, but really like, it should happen over the course of 2 bars, 4 bars, whatever. You speed it up, turn into an arpeggio just for like the intro or whatever. And then kind of create a bunch of layers of the original sample that you're using for your main drop. So this is a bass sample, so I'm using this more so as like a effect sound, like in the background. So what I'm doing on top of that is like processing wise, um, I can open that up. All right, so I have, just a couple things, just like OTT, whatever, erosion, compression, just so it doesn't like clip too hard. And I'm using Valhalla Supermassive just for like space. But I also had a bunch of space in the bass resample itself. So I was adding reverb into different parts in order to get like different textures out of it. So one thing you can do, and this, is something that works in every different DAW with, different, warping algorithms. This is something you should start messing around with. And this is granular because I'm using texture on this. So I'm pitching this down 3 octaves. And, then, kind of crushing this really weird waveform I'm actually getting out of it, which, the low end shouldn't be audible anymore because this is kind of a subnote already. So now I'm going to get really just the texture that's on top of these waveforms. So this is really what I'm going to hear. Those little like iterations, waveforms on top of that. Then I can granulize that. So that's super distorted and broken, but it's supposed to be kind of like an impact sound. And so that's all kind of like from the original sound there. For this actually, let's turn that erosion all the way off. It gets really degraded. That's one of the reasons why I use erosion a lot, because the degradation on the audio files themselves will add different like artifacts and aliasing into the sample. So say if you're trying to like kind of get around that, but you're really just trying to destroy the shit out of this and pitch it around, you might want to try resampling at a higher resolution like 88.2 or 96, either of those. It's kind of like a good safe bet if you're trying to get a little bit more resolution out of it. So yeah, a lot of that high end is lost from this sample right here. And there's a ton of like space and shit, so I do actually want this erosion. So that gives a ton of like, I guess, presence to the sound just because I'm adding that presence into this granulized bass. Okay, so this should be kind of like the main goal. Like, not make this track or whatever, but to start making, bass lines or whatever for yourself. Because when I started making this track, I just kind of like went into my bass resample library and just started piecing together different like chops and stuff. That's one of the reasons why I give this stuff out for free, where it's kind of just like a, piece of inspiration for whoever, to kind of try some shit out with. Or just, have some ideas of random shit I've tried out. It's not really something that I'm personally tied to because, I didn't spend a ton of time just on this one line or any one piece of this. This is me just kind of just designing a patch and just playing it. So that I'm totally fine with giving out and whatever. I don't have to do any implementation. It's not built around that. And I feel the same way about using it later on when I can just go and repurpose this for whatever the fuck I want to do with it. So there's really no like kind of drawback from doing this. It's just like, when do I want to use that? How do I want to use that? And, just apply it to that. So, big part of designing a preset or sample library or whatever for yourself, is doing this type of stuff and kind of building a workflow that works for you for designing sounds like this and just resampling, for 20 minutes straight or whatever. And that could be fun. I definitely had to design a workflow for myself for it. And I've been doing that with a ton of friends for, forever when I've been making music. It's just like we hang out, make sounds, record shit, both walk away with the samples. It's not something we both lose from. So it's all cool. It's something you should just do for yourself though. And start like allocating days or whatever. If you're not really feeling inspired with doing stuff, but you really just, know that you need to start working on music or whatever and keep yourself motivated with it, engaged with it. This is one of those things you can do just every day, whatever, do whatever. Because try any plugin, whatever, yeah, so that's kind of like it's a really good habit to get into. So yeah, let's move on from kind of just talking about resampling now. And just want to kind of show you guys that for anybody that's kind of like, I guess, curious on what that kind of like track looks like. This is kind of what it looks like. Where just a ton of chops, chopping things together, getting different phrases. Like what I'm looking for is a phrase that can kind of like span over 2 bars to 4 bars. So if I'm going to set up a different phrase on my B section, it's going to be kind of the same length. So these are the same pieces of audio. I have little chops in here, modulate it, transition, break it out again, do the same thing again. A little bit different. Kind of the same thing over here. Okay, so really just saying one note, you know, it's not anything like too crazy right now, but there's a lot of like space for me to add a ton of shit in this. And that's kind of how I like to start up ideas, where it's just kind of really based around one groove and one vibe, and how am I going to build and kind of develop that more, you know. So even with these little chops in here, it's the same source audio as well. Here I do a little crossfade edit, and this is kind of blending two different little sounds together, and I'm actually automating, I believe I'm automating grain size. Yeah, so I'm modulating grain size on this piece of audio right here. So it's kind of like saying that original sound that I'm exploiting here, which is kind of like a groove and a like kind of like a pushing vibe, and then I blend it with this granulized version over here. So it kind of like pitches around, does that weird movement. But that's also kind of like in the middle of the phrase. So I was saying like 2 bars or 4 bars. So this is the 2-bar phrase, or I guess 4-bar phrase here, and then kind of like resets. I like to set up a little transition section on my turnaround between the A and B section. So I'll kind of like give the same line again, but then develop on it, break it out, give a little space, and then find a way to reintroduce the bass line. Dope. Okay, so, you know, try some shit out. I'm sure you guys got like a lot of the resamples that I've given out as well, so you can try out shit from there, wherever. Okay, so now let's get this into a sampler and start messing with it. Yeet. Yeah, it's a good tip. You'll probably see that from anybody that's kind of like doing extreme, you know, kind of bass lines or whatever, in almost every different style, you know, whether it be Noisia, frequent, Cursa, you know. You can definitely use a synth live, and I do use a synth live in a lot of tracks. It's not something I don't do. But this is a way that I actually make a ton of different tracks just because of the workflow style. It gives me a lot of different options to choose from. Super organic, doesn't require that much thought. Sometimes when I'm feeling uninspired or whatever, I don't want to think that much while I'm like producing something. So that's kind of the vibe. Okay, so let's, yeah, we got this in the sampler here. And so we're just going to use this regular sampler. Okay, so we kind of talked about sample and hold and stuff like that. So sample and hold, just kind of rehash what that means, and that's also in the guide as well, should be. Sample and hold is when you go and loop one little section of a sample really quickly. So you can actually do kind of like wavetable stuff, whatever. It's a very similar sound to wavetable and similar to granular. Okay, so this has warping on it, so we're going to take that off for now. So with just regular resampling, I guess, or I guess sampling with this, kind of want to play around middle C. It's kind of like the good place to start. So a lot of different options just from that one sound, and I'm just actually like playing it at different pitches here. So the point really is, that I'm not actually doing anything to this sample right now. So if I was to just kind of like load up a drum beat, whatever, behind this and start getting something to kind of like play around with, I can kind of like sync up something that's a little bit wonky, maybe not even sunk in time, but the MIDI is sunk in time. So that could give me a different option of kind of like a different phrase to kind of choose from. So, it kind of works already, depending on how you like your beats and how you like your bass lines. For me personally, that works. Because it does something that's somewhat interesting, moves, down in pitch, and then chomps right at the end. So, if I'm going to go and play that without it sunk to time, meaning just in a, kind of blank sampler, this can be done in any sampler, by the way, then this would be a really interesting way to go and like kind of create either the entire bass line itself or just individual hits for like the end of a phrase or whatever. So, especially if you're doing something kind of interesting with like a respace or whatever. Um, so let's move from there and kind of start doing some like actual looping here. So again, we're in non-granular mode right now. So we can turn on the loop and loop one little section here. Say if I want to get that just like one little chompy line. So now I'm looping this kind of like a wobble donk-ish sound. So I do want to get the beginning of that modulation there. Modulate start time and end time. Okay, and then I want to crossfade so it's not clicking and popping every time it loops. So we can use pitch bend to kind of like speed it up, move it around. It's a pretty interesting sound. For in the more, I guess, advanced sampler here, we can actually change the pitch bend range. But essentially, I'm not doing anything differently here yet. So this is a really good option just to go and use stuff without granular, processing on your actual bass line, which is sometimes ideal. In this case, where I'm, going to actually try to loop this and make like a weird bass line with it, that's super ideal. Right, so that's already doing something pretty interesting. We can go and process that a little bit, get a little bit more weight from the low end again. One thing I like to do as well, like just from default when doing this kind of stuff, specifically with bass lines, that's going to be, like an EDM bass line or a respace, crazy bass resample. Turn off velocity. It's not really something you want in there. You want it to be stagnant, especially when you're triggering the note or even just playing it. Okay, so this effect is actually going to work for a lot of different sounds as well. So this is going to be how we actually create risers and different riser effects. You can also create like pod racer sounds with this. You can create engine noises with this. There's so many different, possibilities with this one technique here because it's literally just looping a sample. You can speed the actual loop up with pitch. So pitch and time are connected. When you make it granular, pitch and time are not connected anymore. So that means when I change the pitch with pitch bend, the speed of the loop will not change. So with the sampler in Ableton, it's always going to be, tape sampler mode. And that's kind of like what they refer to it as. kind of random, but Dillip uses sampler glide for his 808 glides. Yeah. So that's like a really good way to, like, if you're actually using 808 samples like that, to just go and put them in a sampler and then make it mono here, kind of like the way we talked about with making subs in the last synth class. Um, so that's kind of like a really quick way to go and sync everything up, with an 808 sample specifically. So it sounds like you're synthesizing it, but it's really just you using a sample, correctly, um, which is a good skill to have. You definitely want to be able to do that kind of stuff, especially with, like, trap, or if you're producing for stuff or for rappers or whatever. I know Dillip does a lot of that shit, so it's kind of like his style with it. Okay, so yeah, really nothing that I'm like sequencing here. I'm just kind of messing around. But yeah, definitely you can go and apply this to wherever. That's kind of the cool thing with it. Um, when I'm scanning through different little pieces, I'll just kind of like move the start position around. Get a little bit more presence from it. So I'm pushing these up just so it has, expanded noise floor for these bands here, and it just like sustains for longer. Yeah. Chunky. Okay, so really simple technique I just did there. Again, it's really the content that you're putting into it. So just sit down, do some bass resamples, and then you can just kind of do this with anything. So like, just to kind of, I guess, put that into practice, I guess, let's just find something random. So this is a random polygon resample. I think it's a little heavy, not sure. So I can highlight one little region like this, drag it out, drop it in, and it should go and find it here, which it did. Great. Okay, so this is more melodic, which is not a bad thing. All right, let me show you why. So we were talking about, the, sample and hold stuff. I really like to sample and hold on really melodic samples, for anything really. Because really when you sample and hold, you can go straight down to the sample itself, where this is like one iteration of a waveform. I can loop that. So we can set that up here by turning on the loop mode, sustain mode. It's kind of like in the beats, kind of mean the same thing. And we want to turn off snap. So it doesn't snap us to zero crossings it thinks are there. So we just want to make sure that we can just loop like a couple iterations here. Okay, so this sounds really zappy and weird. I can make it less zappy by crossfading it. All right, and then if you want to tune it, play a C anywhere on the piano, I guess. Middle C is a good place, but you can do it wherever. And then load up a tuner of any kind. This should, you know, with the worst tuners, which I would classify Ableton's as one of the worst, you should be able to find the pitch on this. All right, so that's an A plus 25 cents. So we can subtract 25. So we want this to line up with our oscillator here. So we can just go and like repitch it, you know, and make it a C by pitching it up a few semitones. But we want it to play C when I play C. So then the oscillator inside of it knows that that's also C, throws a C at a C. Everything lines up. So the FM aspect of this sampler actually sounds usable, not just all over the place. All right, so the note that was kind of allocated here was an A, so we set it to an A, and then subtracted 25 cents. And now when we play C, it's a C. So yeah, hopefully this does give you some ideas. A ton of different ways to like make some basses here. I guess the only weird thing now is like making sure you don't change your loop size. So now you technically should be able to scan through this. Now it's always going to be the actual note that you're playing, which is cool. Right, so this works with any sampler. Any sampler. Doesn't matter what sampler it is. As long as it can loop like this, meaning small values, which most of them do, then you can create kind of sounds like this. Just from the sample itself. So again, more crossfade, less buzz, more buzz. So there's a little like, you know, movement from the compressor going on the high end. So it's kind of like belling in. So it just like had like an attack on the high end. Wanted to pull that back, so I pulled back the time on the OTT here. All right, so we got that like weird bell tone at the top of this sample, which is kind of cool because that's going to be, you know, something I can use with this FM part here. We're kind of moving into the next section, which is, you know, using bass resampling like this and sampling now, but we're going to apply FM to it. So first thing first, which I just did, was tune the original pitch of the sample. Make sure you play a C when you trigger C. So that'll make everything line up. So we can add, you know, just amplitude here. We can add sustain. That's something I usually like to add first as well. We don't really have to change release because release is really going to be dictated by this. So having it 100% on the oscillator just really gives it, you know, an infinite, I guess, tracking for this release here. Okay, so I like to have a little bit of release and a little bit of attack, kind of like what I was talking about in the last class on how to kind of like set up bass lines, or I guess bass patches. Same thing applies here. You want it to be mono. You want it to have a little bit of attack and release just so it doesn't sound all clicky and poppy. And then, you know, full sustain mono voice. So it allows you to use portamento, glide stuff, as well as just be clean. If you don't, you know, if you notice that there's like a ton of rumble or whatever in your subs and, you know, you're using like 808s and it's happening in the 808s, make sure that it's in mono. It will be night and day, like literally. one of the biggest things that happens is your phase doesn't line up on the different subnotes because the actual sine wave in the waveform is lining up at a different start point, so it starts to beat with itself really. So you want to make sure that they're always in mono. So both phase restarts perfectly and they don't overlap with each other. That's something you never really have to worry about though when you're working with audio because you can just see, you know, so that's kind of like the thing you have to balance. Hey, thanks for the follow, dude. Appreciate you. Okay, so I'm gonna add some FM now. Right, so that works, right? So if it wasn't tuned, it wouldn't have done the whole thing I just made happen right there, which is add volume and just feel and hear the harmonics kind of fill in. You know, not just this random noise that's just like, wow, that's grating. You know, it's something is actually intelligible in that. So what's really cool is you can kind of make really, really interesting sounds between sample and hold in FM because of the fact that you're working with really, really random source material. Right. And you can also see that left and right channel are a little bit offset. So that means that the sample itself has movement between left and right channel, which you can even just see here. So if I want something that's a little bit more in sync left and right channel, that would probably be right here. We have movement between left and right channel and the rest of the waveform. It even becomes out of phase with itself. So that's something to keep in mind. Out of phase is when both, you know, waveforms line up like this. You want them to look like this, where they both have the same start position and both finish and, I guess, start their compression phase and rarefaction stage at the same time. If they're in opposite stages at the same time, then that means that they're out of phase at that point, which can be really, really dope though. It's not a problem. If, say, I put this sound right here and started adding FM into it, and then I went and added a sub into this sound, which in Ableton I can go and create an instrument rack and just load up an operator or whatever and drop it into my rack here. Not always in the same octave, but they should be playing the same note because I have the root notes lined up. All right, so they are in different octaves, so I'm going to shift this down a couple. Right, so you can hear a big stereo image on this one, whereas this one lines up a little bit more mono. So do you want to make the peak or make the loop length peak to peak generally? For the most part, you could add more than one iteration of a waveform. I tend to go and find, you know, one waveform just because just knowing how iterations work within a window, the window is going to dictate the octave. So if there's more than one iteration or cycle of a waveform in the window, then it's going to be one octave above this. So it'd actually be, you know, like a C3, whereas I'm playing like a C2 right now. Because and I'm saying that because I had to pitch down the operator 2 octaves. That's really the reason. Right, so I'm adding Sawtooth FM, which is going to be really, really intense. And we can also, you know, change attack and decay times to kind of like make it move around in between those two different kind of sounds here. A 1-to-1 ratio is always going to give it more of just like a sync oscillator effect. We've talked about that with like the FM portion. Right, so now I kind of have like a little functional bass line going on here. I can add effects, whatever. You know, it's just kind of a top bass now because I'm not really worried about the low end in it. That's something you should be thinking about when you're doing bass samples like this. Why really? Because when I start to go and make bass lines just out of like bass samples or samples in a sampler, the low end, even if I am able to juice the low end out of it, becomes super wobbly. So I'm not really a huge fan of that. And I'll end up, adding a sub anyways. So, if I don't need sub anymore and I just want to put this in its own track, I can literally just drag this operator out of the instrument rack and then just put it right here. So just kind of makes things easy for that. It's kind of like working with drums in Ableton as well. Right, so I'm adding LFO modulation to the volume here. In this one, and this is kind of like another thing with like more advanced samplers. You can do this with Faceplant as well. Just doing modular, or I guess semi-modular, so I can just look at a list and see things that I want to go and patch to it. Super crucial because I want to go and patch it to volume as well as volume of my actual oscillator here. So I want to do both of those at the same time because the volume of the oscillator is going to give movement to the sample itself. So I want to make sure that that's both in sync. I can actually just use this one LFO, or I guess two LFOs here, but I don't want to have to macro them together. So I just want them to be on LFO 2 because I can allocate them like this. All right, so that's my reasoning. And then sync it up again. Right, so we can also modulate a couple other things as well. We can also modulate loop start and loop length. So this is something that you kind of want to keep. It's going to change a lot of stuff, so you're gonna want to like be careful with this, I guess. But yeah, you just want to keep them in relation to each other. So the loop start moves with the loop end, so they're both kind of like modulating at the same time. I'm gonna type in just a stagnant number here instead of trimming it like that. Alright, so I decided to use this LFO1 now just because I'm actually moving this loop start and end point around now. So this is where it's moving. You can see that actual start position moving around here. You can't see the loop move, unfortunately, but you can see some of it move. And when I scan through samples, I like the linear curves specifically because they're just kind of like a straight line in the playback. Sinoid curves can be cool as well, but this just has given me kind of better results consistently. Let's go back to 50 here. I don't believe you can actually macro these together. Yeah, can't. That's a drawback. Okay, so that's it's an interesting sound. It's kind of like experimenting, making it really quick. If you go and turn this to like hertz and then start adding like high frequency modulation into like movement on the sample, even doing this with like wavetable stuff in Serum, you'll start to kind of create new overtones just from that. But this is a little bit scrapey. Not really looking for that sound. All right, so if the patch is getting more complex and you're starting to deal with multiple different like modulators, I mean, this is a technique for both sound designing with the synth for bass lines and with samplers, is you want to make sure things are macroed together, say just like with speed of that kind of thing. So right-click macro, and this is going to be in the sync mode. Both of these have different, you know, targets you can hit for. It's going to be like a hertz rate or a sunk rate. So you have to have it set to the sunk before you can do it. Okay, so I usually do that if I'm going to be moving a bunch of stuff around. So just like I was doing before, yeah, I can add another modulation. There's a shaper in here, there's filter morphing, there's all types of shit. So I can put this onto whatever. Like this will be my effect modulator. This is for the sampler. And then I can set this to like the volume of the oscillator as well. But regardless, I'm setting it to the volume as well as some other, you know, destination. And they're going to be kind of sunk together. Right. Pretty interesting. Really cool when you're doing this with like really high frequency ones as well. A lot of the bass lines, like from, think my track on Mad Zoo, the You Gave Me track, that was all this technique here. It was just like a bunch of VCV rack samples that I made, and then I added Sawtooth FM into it in order to kind of like create all the texture for that bass line. Right, and so remember that this is the source audio for this sample I just, or that bass line I just made. It's also being worked. So not really something that you would typically make into a bass line, but, you know, it's fair game. Honestly, this is one of the most transformative styles of sampling that you could do, because if you were to say what is transformative, okay, let's define the ways. You know, is it using the original performance? No. Is it using the original message? No. You can't say that a waveform in somebody's voice, or, you know, a bass line, whatever, any kind of sample in general, is not transformative, because that's literally just kind of like a source audio material. You could try to go and, you know, dissect it, I guess, and then be all CSI about it, I guess. Like, see, we slowed it down 50 million times. Enhance, enhance, overlay. You see, they line up here. It's like, no, nobody does that. The only time you're going to get knocked on non-transformative if you're using the original like message. Like you can repurpose stuff and then give it like kind of like a new perspective. and that's a little bit less intelligible. So, you know, like using an acapella on like a turnaround or whatever, or even just kind of like phrasing it inside of your drop or whatever, that's not transformative. So I can get in trouble for that, and I know that. But I'm doing it like that because, well, A, I like it, and B, they're not really going to notice because I don't see this track becoming top 40. I'm not going to be making a ton of money off of it, so I'm not worried about that. It's more of a you know, DJ tool, that kind of thing. But when I go and do stuff that I plan on releasing on Spotify or whatever, things that I do make royalties on, um, that's something I'm going to think about. Um, so, you know, again though, I'm using source audio and source material that I made myself. So I can go and get Diana Ross and, you know, do the same exact process and then say, yeah, I made my bass line from Diana Ross. But I could have done exactly the same thing from anything else. Um, so sample and hold is really the big thing here, is I'm holding on one sampled waveform of this, tuning it into the pitch of the root key. That's the first step. Find the root key, find the waveform, and then make sure everything's in line for the sampler. So then you can just kind of use it like a synth. That's kind of like the whole point with it. Okay, so there's a ton of stuff to kind of like cover. So we talked about you know, 808s and subs on Tuesday. So we're going to be kind of talking about that now, and just kind of like going through, just kind of like using 808s and subs like that. So FM sampling, million things you can do with this. Um, and like, in fact, you can like bank your entire sound on this one technique, like literally. Like if you, you know, were coming up at all in terms of like sound design, and I'm, you know, I'm just speaking from my own experience, I guess, or just from where I was coming from, learning this stuff back in like 2012, 2011. Um, there was little to no resources on this stuff. So there was a bunch of people who did have it figured out, like in Bristol, and that was a lot of the sound at the time. And their sound specifically was totally shaped by this technique itself. Like if you're talking about cone sound, they're in Reason at that time. Where Reason, you know, you're using Maelstrom and an XT. That's why I use Maelstrom as an example, because Maelstrom is a mixture of granular and wavetable. So it is kind of like sample and hold, but it's also giving you granular control. So it's pretty cool, but you can also just make some insane bass lines with Maelstrom. And that was something like I definitely came up on because Reason was the only way I was able to like do sound design stuff for a while. So my computer just was not strong enough at that time to like use native instruments and shit in Pro Tools. So um, until I started getting into Ableton, where it's a lot lower of a footprint for that kind of stuff, it's a little bit more of a workaround. But even so, even when I was working in Pro Tools, I would go into Reason and I would print all that shit and I would do exactly what I just did here. This was like the beginning of my process and still is my process because it's so effective. Yeah, it's like if it's not broken, don't fix it. So this is like an amazing way to just start ideas and then just like literally wrangle all these ideas into something that's intelligible. Um, because like half of people's sounds, you know, if you're gonna talk to any specific producer about like, oh, where'd you find this sound? It's like, oh, I was just fucking around, dude. I don't even know what I'm doing. It's like that's pretty much gonna be everybody's explanation at first. But then you're like, oh well, I always do it like this, and so I just fuck around and then record it. And so that becomes the process. And, you know, really like nobody's nobody's not benefiting from that. I don't know one person that's not benefiting from doing shit like this on the regular. If you're trying to get into this style of music, you gotta kind of like build a process for yourself like that. Literally, yeah, I'll say it again. Literally, everybody does this, including everybody who's a um, like lo-fi artists or people who work with audio specifically have an opinion about sound design elitists for real. So they themselves also do this. So this is not something that anybody in any perspective of sound design, not sound design, is not going to benefit from. I know some of those people who do talk shit about that and, go to their homie with a Eurorack and grab sounds from them. And they're giving them this. So then they can chop this up and do exactly what I did here, but they didn't make this. So that's not a problem, but just have a healthy perspective on it. Just be like, okay, I can do that for myself, literally. Um, One person who was amazing with that, and not to speak from a place of whatever, but Dr. Dirk was definitely somebody who did that shit all the fucking time. And I remember he was like way up on Simplant and all these other like really, really dope plugins that like he was making a lot of his early shit from that. Just literally fucking around those plugins and recording that shit and putting it over a beat that he makes. So that's really the thing is like people, once they go and start getting the sounds, you have all these different growl basses, whatever, immediately assume, oh, I have to make dubstep. It's not the case. You can do this with whatever. You can make a Bjork track, put a growl bass in one of the transitions and make it tasteful. There's a way to do it. 1000%. Uh, yeah, I do have albino. And I have all the Rob Papin stuff as well. Rob Papin. Anyways, so definitely start doing this for yourself. If you're not doing it, it's going to be harder, I guess, to do the final project for this class, because if you do this, you can do this for every perspective of synthesis. So everything I'm going to show you over the course of this like 110 shit, you just go and take this week 1 technique, apply it from bass to everything else, and you're good to go. Because if you sit down for 10 minutes, 15 minutes and design shit, record it, you have 200 plus sounds to work from. So just try to integrate that into your process somehow. It's only gonna get better, really. Like some of your first sounds might not be great, but that could be something that you use in everything, I know a bunch of people like that. It's like, oh dude, I made this like 10 years ago, but I fucking still use blah blah blah. I have some sounds like that. But, a lot of this stuff is just from like VCV Rack. This is not even like the most current one. So, or I guess the most old one. This is the most current one. I said that backwards. But yeah, this is just a bunch of different like hour-long, plus sessions where I'm just doing that exact thing. Yeah, and it really doesn't matter. It's not just all bass samples. Like this is like a drum beat, and it's like a bunch of different like resamples with that sequencer. So it gives me a bunch of different options to use for like intro leads. Or I can use that on the drop. So it's like a bunch of different shit from one sample. It's like if I'm just using this like on a whim, chose this one sample, I can have, 3 different styles of tracks I can make from this. So, all right, I'm going to end that rant there. Okay, so now let's talk about some a little bit more complicated plugins, I guess. We can load up Polygon, start doing that shit again. And this is not the new Polygon yet. Still the old one. Okay, so you can load any sample into this. I have all my samples here. I have the Polygon samples as well. These ones are super good. Love using this. Okay, so you can do sample and hold stuff in this same way I just did in the last one. But you can also just straight up make experimental layered basses. And that's something that's super cool with Polygon specifically. Because it does have a sub-oscillator built into it, has a granular engine, has all this modulation, a mod matrix as well. You can do 10 times what you can do in sampler with this. I'm just looking for a random one. Actually, don't want any of these. I want a hybrid something. Okay, so that's like some Foley sound. It's a little too gritty. All right, so we got a couple Foley sounds here. Okay, so we have tone. That's what we're looking for here. I'm looking for tone. So I want something that makes a pitch. And then we have texture from this kind of like Foley sample I have on the top. So I'm going to granulize this, and I'm going to stretch out the textured kind of like high-end sound here. So on here, this is the length of each grain. And then this is going to be the stretch. Let's zoom in here. There's going to be a high sizzle on top of the sound. The focus is going to show me more or less of the actual sample itself. So I just want the place in the sample that actually has content, not any of the like tail. And then I want it to loop as well. So this is the looping, kind of like Ableton, forward, backward, or forward and backward, or off. So we want it to be on, and I'm actually just going to put into forward, backward mode still, yeah. Because it's kind of a random texture. I'm not looking for anything really specific from it. I just want it to just be texture, do what it's doing. All right, so I'm gonna stretch out the texture and I'm gonna add feedback to it. So the feedback will kind of give it this kind of like metallic quality. Cool. All right, so now we're gonna add sub. So the little mute button, we're gonna need to turn that off. All right, there we go. All right, so that's pretty much in pitch. It's a little bit harmonized with it. It's like kind of around a fifth or whatever. And we can do the same thing to go and find the pitch there with like the tuner and stuff. But for this one, I'm just gonna earball it. Okay, so this is super cool for like making anything that's not like, you know, like crazy bassline central. Like I really love doing like kind of like garage stuff with this. I guess deep house, deep whatever. Something that's not as like, you know, mega hype. Cool. All right, so this sounds pretty interesting. So we can try to like kind of mess around with this as well. I can try sample and holding in different spots here. So this is gonna be the loop in Polygon. I can make it really, really small here. right, so we also have a square wave here, and this is actually really cool with the filter. Then we'll send this to filter 2. Just get a little bit more weight from the sub. All right, so now I'm tuning the actual grain itself with my grain size here. You can kind of balance it out with the stretch as well, kind of give you like a weird texture. So let's put this second texturing sound on top. All right, so we have stuff to move. So now I'm looping this at a finer focus. So I'm focusing in on the sample here, and then I'm going to modulate this loop. So I'm going to use the source here, LFO1 destination sampler 1 loop start. We'll start there. So LFO1 here, I'm going to slow that down. So now I can focus in on the actual amount here. I'm gonna make it smaller so it's not going like at that large range over a large course of time. Couldn't you bring out the tone with an EQ and put a reverb after it? Yes. So that is a very valid way to do that. Especially because what Ori's talking about is he's making it way more louder, you know, the Carnage technique. But what that really is you're resonating a tone into it with an EQ. And when you resonate a tone into a sound with an EQ, it's using a self-oscillating EQ, like a Pro Q, anything high-end, and Ableton's built-in EQ will resonate sounds into it. Really what I'm going for with this is just kind of like a textured, you know, this could be like a bass line for kind of like a garage tune, or just kind of like a deeper, more emo kind of like hip-hop tune or whatever. Yeah, there's a ton of different like styles like that I'm super into, kind of like Sorrow, Submerse. I love Submerse. That's somebody that I've been into for a super long time. Also owns his own label, I think, now in Japan. Okay, so I changed this LFO here to actually being sample and hold. So the sample and hold here, because it's so small of a value, it's actually creating this like really interesting pitching effect. So this is going to randomize the size of this loop. So now we're creating, you know, pretty much a sample and hold loop on Polygon, but we're using its ignore. We're using its actual like modulation in here to do more interesting effects. And they're using, you know, the sub to kind of layer with it and just kind of give it texture. I can also do this to the second oscillator as well, second sampler. So we have less content to work from in this one, but this could sound pretty cool. Okay, so this overall grain size here is really going to affect the sound on this, and then where you're setting your start and end position here. So small amounts are going to get that sample and hold kind of sound. So a lot of that tone on the second sampler is actually coming from the stretch. So I'm actually going to put that on that. So I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to make it a small value. I'm not going to make it go like between 0 and 100%. I'm going to make it kind of like 10% around a center position. So I love that because it's like, it's a little bit microtonal. And that's really what I love about like Eurorack stuff and just glitchy kind of sounds is the microtonality of stuff is it's just different. It's got its own kind of like key to it really. You know, music is relative in terms of even pitch. So each culture has its own kind of version of that. I love like glitch effects just because they kind of exploit just pitch in general, kind of like all over the place and stuff. Okay, so we're using filter 2 to get a lot of this texture out of here, and we're not actually filtering this yet. We're low passing the square wave. So I'm gonna add a little amplitude onto this high pass filter, and then I'm gonna add a metalizer into it. So that's pretty interesting. Like something that, I wouldn't have been able to make with Serum. This is really the point. It's something I wouldn't be able to make with Serum, something I wouldn't be able to make with any other synth. I need a sampler to do this process. Like, this is my whole reasoning why I choose samplers and why I choose granular samplers too. It's like, okay, what are you doing different with the modulation? How can I exploit the sample and hold in this aspect? Because anytime you go and start to put stuff into samplers and granular samplers, you're going to be doing this in some aspects. So figure out how it's working in that different sampler in order to exploit different source material, because I can do this with, again, anything. And I'm using these kind of like textured samples here, kind of like Foley samples, in order to make this whole sound. Not worried about sub, because I have a sub oscillator built into it. And so that's one of the big selling points for me in workflow on this, because then I can go and like, and this is part of, I guess, bass sound design for me too, because I do a ton of like reverb effects. I guess we can just use the stock Ableton verb for now. But yeah, the reverb effects with this, specifically Polygon too, and we'll check it out in Granulator in a second. God. See, I can't even use that. It sounds so bad. I can't even like use it for a second. Use Room. Room is a good one. What makes a reverb bad to me is the tinniness and the amount of clicks and pops I hear from just modulating grain size in that. That is another type of sampler. It just sounds so bad. It just sounds so bad. I also make like pitch down kind of basses as well with this. We'll use another LFO. So LFO3, we're going to use this for pitch. So I'm going to be assigning pitch to the sub oscillator. I'm going to use it on stuff that gives me pitch, which is going to be, so LFO3 again, source modulator destination. So metalizer time value as well. We're going to make that small for now, actually off, so I can go and fine tune it. I'm also getting some textured movement from the sampler to grain size as well, so I'm going to modulate that too. Okay, so now we're going to go into LFO3, and this is going to be in retrigger mode. I want to start over every time I hit it. I want it to pitch down, so I want it to be a saw down. I can add another pitch envelope too, so that's something I'm going to do. So we'll use envelope 1 for that. And I'm just going to assign it to the sub oscillator for now. So envelope 1 onto sub oscillator pitch. And this is honestly, if you can start getting a workflow in Polygon, it's really, really beneficial. Why? Because you'll kind of understand semi-modular matrices. Because these are like, this shouldn't be confusing at all. Unfortunately, the way it's laid out, the amount of knobs, it makes you feel like you're looking at Eurorack, and that's kind of Evo's whole idea. The glitch machines dude. He's a very circuit bent kind of guy. He actually makes circuit bent tools and whatever. He's one of my mentors, so just like, that's just the way he thinks. This is the way he thinks. And so when you're kind of a sound designer like that, you apply that type of thing that you want. Like, give me all the LFOs, give me all the envelopes, and then you end up making this. Where you're just like, whoa, dude, 8 LFOs, man? Like, yeah, Like, couldn't you have put those in like different pages? Nah. All right. You know, so like that's kind of what you have to work around with a bunch of the more sound designy stuff, which is this. So if you're, I actually got a question uh, earlier about um, how to use VCV rec with granular synthesis. And there's a million different ways. But this, if you are curious on how to get into granular synthesis with a modular synthesizer, this is a great tool to start with. And I also give this out. So this is the first version. So this is not something that you're really going to be able to buy anymore. So you can go and grab this version of Polygon with the week 2 materials for samplers if you're looking for it. Yeah, drum workflow is really good, you know, but they both kind of go hand in hand. So you want to be able to phrase, make groove, as well as apply that. Hence why when I'm doing this stuff and resampling, it's very crucial I have a drum beat, or else I don't really know what I'm doing with it. I lose perspective. If I'm just making like crazy patches or whatever, that doesn't matter. But if I'm trying to resample, I'm trying to record stuff, if I'm not just going to be doing like pod racer sounds or whatever, and just trying to make the goopiest growl I can do, which with a beat that becomes obtrusive. I'm just like, just move out of the way. I'm trying to just like repitch for like 8 bars. That doesn't require a beat. But when you're making like bass lines, like it's like all the shit I've used here. This was a bass line that I played and came up with while recording. So that was the whole point. And that's, again, back to my point about phrasing, talked about the Beatles, whatever, what sound or what phrase riff can you remember after playing once. This is my way of doing it. This is how I apply it for EDM. EDM, you know, or just electronic music in general, hip hop, whatever, sound design. You know, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to apply it? If I'm trying to make wish sounds for specifically a commercial or whatever, which wish sounds equal movement, so it can be like, whoosh, whoosh, you know, the camera moving around, whatever. I'm just going to have the video on, and I'm going to be using a synth, watching the video, doing the movements while it's happening, and recording. So I'm performing all the sound design for a scene, you know, and then I can go and do that with each individual piece. Why do I do it that way? Because Foley sound design. And Foley sound design is all about that. If you're going to, you know, individually sync up each footstep, that's chill. But you can also, you know, put 2 shoes on edge, like the end of a plunger, and then just watch the dude walk, and then just kind of just walk with your arms and just stamp it. You're just watching. So I did that for this one game for like a small child, though. It was supposed to be a small child running through the woods, and it's all scary and shit. And yeah, I just got my baby shoes, like literally my baby shoes. I was like, oh, look, I'll use these. And I put them on the edges of like sticks, and then I was just like, oh, little baby feet. And then, you know, put them on top of leaves, babies running on leaves, babies running on cement. Where's the baby running now? So that's the kind of like perspective I do with it there, but I also apply that same exact thing here, where it's like, if I'm going to be making, you know, grimy sounds for grime music, then I'm going to have a grime beat. If I'm going to do drum bass shit for drum bass, then it's going to be that. But in this aspect, you can go and take your drum bass sound for drum bass and apply it to anything, just like you can with your donk sounds for donk music. Like this session here was a donk session for like whatever I was going to do with donks, and it turned into this wonky halftime track. So that's kind of like the vibe with that. Just kind of like roll with it, create a groove that you can kind of like get behind and start creating bass lines for yourself to kind of exploit later. So you can just kind of like manipulate shit. But you know, in terms of like synthesis with sampling, like these are the ways that we can like get really, really interesting shit. All right, so we're doing the pitch down thing here. Okay, so we're also going to attach the pitch here of envelope 1 to a sampler 2's pitch. We're also going to do sampler 1 as well. So envelope 1, and then here, good to go. Okay, so we have two pitch envelopes going on right now. We have one retriggered with the LFO, and then we have another one that's this envelope here. So we can make a bunch of movement by kind of pitching it up, pitching it down here. Yeah, these are kind of like bass effects here. Add a little bit more curve. The release curve when it's not in loop mode is going to be for decay here. Decay is not decay when it's not in loop mode. It's become super interesting to play this super low pitch. Then we got stutter edit here. I'm going to run that from the metalizer. I'm going to just add on to this one route that we're doing. We're just patching envelope 1 into things right now. And we can also patch LFO3 into it as well. So that's effects, stutter, we'll do size. Now we'll get LFO3 running to the size as well. We can also do repeats, which stutter repeats is going to mean feedback. Ratio is going to be kind of like size as well. They're kind of like both in reference to each other. crazy, dude. Okay, so I hope that gives you a ton of different ideas of shit to try. So just to kind of reiterate what I just did here, you know, to make that crazy sound. I added sample and hold onto the size of the loop here to kind of like jump it around, same way I was doing with the samplers, but now I have all this crazy modulation to work with. And then I added in the sub to give it weight. That's how I got all that kind of like weight underneath this really glitchy sound. You know, what equates like, you know, some type of alien ship kind of flying by is like the rumble and sub of its engine. So everything else that happens on top is some type of like textured diegetic sound, which diegetic means, you know, what's happening on screen. So if you see a bunch of little robots doing things and whatever, they could potentially have any random sound that kind of pairs with it, really. So it could just literally be all this random movement here that's like the robot. So it's like if you were even thinking about that, like, okay, how do I make a robot with this? Okay, so it's repeating a bunch of times. So maybe it could be replicating something. It's like a robot flying by and it's shooting out these little like drones. And every time a drone comes out, it's just like bam, 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 bam. So it's always like chopping them out. All right. Okay, so ton of stuff for you to try on that. Ton of like random bass effects for you to get from that. Really, what you should be doing with that kind of stuff, the random glitchy sound design, if you're not going to be, like, I guess, making glitchy stuff like that, you can go and try to make a bass line, you know, that's a little bit more textured or whatever. Record it, put in a reverb, turn it into a lead, make it something though. You can do something with that. Hence why I even used a polygon sample to make like this resample over here, because this was the same exact process I just did. And then I put it into the sampler and made this sound. So I wouldn't have been able to get this individual waveform without doing all that weird shit. But it's not like I'm saying you have to do that. I'm saying this was something that allowed me to find something random, you know? I'm very calculated with the way I do shit, most of the time. So I appreciate things that can help me find random stuff. Like, especially like when I'm looking for stuff that evokes something for me from music, because that's like 1000% a requisite on why I like music. So now that I've been doing it for so long, I have to go and refine things that give me new perspectives on that. And bass resampling like that can be like 1000% the process. Okay, so let's get into some more basic shit. So with Granulator 2, I can run through that pretty quickly because there's a whole thing on it, and I want to show you like a couple things on, I guess, how to resample some stuff. That's gonna be kind of extra at the end. But let's make a little, I guess, bass sampler. So I'm gonna go and find a sample from one of these packs that I know has some pretty decent stuff for this shit. All right, so my boom bap kit. Okay, so we have a ton of different like sub samples we can work with, and we're gonna talk about the sub with that in a second here. Okay, so we got that. So we want something that's like giving us the tonality of the bass itself. But then, you know, somewhat usable. We don't want something sliding around like that. That's pretty good because it has a little iteration. Not as much. So I like that because it goes up into a note and the other one slides down. Both could be good. It's me playing it down 5 octaves. All right, so just like that, you just drop it in, it's done. All right, so there's a couple more things you need to do, just to make it sound like more real, I guess. So again, mono voice, unless you're gonna be like playing chords with it, which can be a thing. I've definitely like made leads out of stuff like this where I've just to kind of, I guess, leads and chords and stuff. You know, I'd like bandpass it like this. Then we can add voices. Kind of make it like a little like pluck. Okay, so that can be cool. You can try that out. All right, so that little like movement right there is actually going to be distracting. Then we have click and pop now. All right, so that movement is actually right here. It's the note that comes right before this note. Okay, so we want to make that mono again. So I don't want all that air on the top. I want to kind of make it a little bit dark. I want to shave off a little bit of the mud too, so I'm going to scoop that out around 150. I'm going to subtract like 4 or 5 dB. So the beat I have in this track is like way too fat for this. So I'm gonna just load in a little loop that I can just like jam along with. Not to toot my own horn, but that beat's just too big, man. No, just like too processed. I would have to like, it just wouldn't sound right. Why am I showing this? Just kind of like off the top of my head, why I would show this. This is like how I write lo-fi shit. Because I write a ton of lo-fi, and that's just kind of like my chill, like on a chill Sunday or whatever, I'll just sit down and write like a really good vibe lo-fi track. That's just kind of like what I love doing. You know, lo-fi is something I like to write just to release tension. You know, I make other music to release other types of tension. Like if I make something really heavy or whatever, I'm probably in a shit mood. So there's a, you know, listen to my music. I'm probably in a bad mood a lot of the time. There's a lot of bad things, man. Okay, that's the one. That's got the feel. Okay, so I'm going to process this just a little bit. So I'm just kind of playing this like I would a bass. So I guess, you know, I have an advantage with that because I'm a bass player. But really what you're trying to do, like if you're trying to do some like lo-fi shit with this, and this is not just a lo-fi technique, by the way. if you're ever listening to like Calix and TB, a lot of their shit on RAM. Their last like huge album, it was all like stand-up bass on the drop, and it was fucking dope, and I fucking loved it. Okay, so I will make this granular. So why am I going to make this granular is because when I play it at different pitches, I don't want it to speed up. I want it to be the same speed when I play it around 2 to 3 octaves. Okay, so I've done a ton of different like bass lines like this just to kind of like get a filler for if I do want to go and like record bass for something, or if I actually just need this sound for like an intro part or whatever. Like on the newest HFO track that I just released on Courteous, that was like kind of the vibe at the beginning, where that was kind of like I was trying to go for like a lo-fi kind of vibey thing for the intro, and then just use like bass resamples of my actual bass in a sampler to kind of like just play along with that. And if I wanted like a really subby part like at the beginning of the phrase or whatever, I'll just like add in an 808. But this should really just kind of like hold down most of the line. So, you can tune it, set the root note, whatever. This is not going to be as crucial that you have in tune. Really, it's just like, are you playing the right note? So you just want to make sure that you're in the right key now. So, if I'm playing in C here and the original sample is an A, then technically I'm playing an A, when I'm just playing a C. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's kind of move on here and talk about 808s. I know that's going to be like definitely a thing that people ask about. All right, so obviously you can use any 808. Let's use some Sophie 808s. Sophie. Okay, so same exact process here. So obviously you don't want it to be more than mono here as well. Go and make that mono. Then with this, we're definitely going to want to go into sampler. Why? Because we have less flexibility in simpler. We have granular capabilities, but we do not have portamento, glide, anything like that. So we have to make sure that, keep that in mind. Then we also have to know what note we're playing. With an 808, it's super easy to find that. So this is an E. So that means we go to sample and then set it to E. I can go up to E, go down to E, either or. So now I'm playing C and it is C. So again, how do I find the root note? I play C, it says E. I go to E on the root note. Now C will say C. Cool. Okay, so now it's in mono, so now when I play multiple notes, it's going to not overlap. Perfect. So now we need to get it to kind of glide to that next note. So in here we have Our pitch envelope, pitch oscillator settings. We can add a pitch envelope here. We can add FM as well. I really, really like adding FM to subsamples. This is something I fucking love doing. Make a ton of bass lines with this. So that's fun. That should give you some ideas. But yeah, so right here we'll turn on glide, portamento. Portamento should be for polyphonic, so we want to go glide for monophonic. Okay, so in sampler, as I just demonstrated, glide is going to kind of be legato as well. And you can see on the left-hand side over there, the global glide mode used in conjunction with the time parameter to smoothly transition between pitches. Glide is a standard monophonic glide, while portamento works polyphonic. So portamento also still triggers the envelope, and so they don't say that. It's kind of annoying. But, you know, say if you want the original sample to retrigger, keep it in portamento mode, and then you can change the glide time between those notes with the time. Okay, so simple. So how do we do that again? We made sure the root note was synced or sunk, and then we can back off the attack if you want. Take off a little bit of the punch of the actual kick 808. You can even go and change the start position. If I don't want that, I'll go and look in the sample. This is relatively in phase. Left and right channel are definitely off. Relatively in phase. So if I want to get rid of that entirely, I can do that here. So the only problem with it being out of phase, again, is just for the FM stuff. So this is going to be kind of okay for a for an 808. But yeah, really what's going to happen if you have an 808 like this is it's going to sit somewhat to the outside of your kick, because your kick is going to be hitting mono, and it should. If your kick doesn't, it probably is being set with like an imager and spread out somehow. So, you know, you want to make sure that your 808 specifically, you know, the low end of it is either purposely being phased out and spread like this, or line it up and make it mono. So sometimes I'll just do that. Say in this case, with this sub, I can go and just go into utility here, and then I can have it listen to left channel only. Easy. So if I want one of these channels that starts directly at the downbeat here, which is the left channel, can you just look at that channel too? I want to see the right channel. All right, so really simple way to set that up. So how does portamento work on a basic synthesizer? Really just make sure that you're holding down the first note, and then while holding that note down, play the next one. You can't let go of the note before you trigger the next one. So if we're looking at it in MIDI, and this is a little bit more advanced stuff. I actually want to do like a whole section on just like implementing bass lines and stuff, so we'll talk more about this shit, because there's a bunch of actual like tricks to just use MIDI with bass. And this is one of them. Where, say if I wanted to glide to F sharp, this is the note I want, the one at the top. This bottom one is just there to create glide. Okay, so C3 right here, cool. So I can just nudge this off the grid by a slight amount like this. Can be that much. And then I have one note that starts below it that's on the downbeat. So this is going to trigger the downbeat of this as well as slide to this note. So in this case, because I just want to get that punch of the first one, if I do both of those notes, it's going to re-trigger that envelope. I can actually turn this into glide mode. So it's just always going to glide to that next note. And so that's why in new synthesizers, they have the button that says always glide. So you don't have to go and do stuff like this. Back in my day, I had to glide both ways up and down the hill 4 fucking miles, man. We had to fucking start our A note fucking 3 years ahead of our next note, bro. So yeah, this can be like a really quick way to go and just like create pitch effects as well. So I'm like creating a little pitch down effect by just manipulating the glide here. And that's something that you should definitely kind of get up on if you're not already kind of doing that stuff with just MIDI. So there's a ton of stuff to do with MIDI specifically. So just think about that for now. It's like, how do you want to go and manipulate MIDI and kind of mess with weird stuff? Sometimes I'll do that with like individual like percussive hits. I guess just to show you that really quick. And this is something that if you're not aware of this with the MIDI in Ableton, it's kind of crazy. So you can warp MIDI in Ableton. So you can just go and grab sections of MIDI and you can trim them like this and warp the shit out of them. So sometimes I'll go and like, you know, make a bunch of notes or whatever. Say if I was making like a random sound or whatever. Loud hi-hat. And I'll also do this with like bass lines and stuff. So I have this little click. So I can take all these clicks and then trim them. So now I get all that stuff. I can kind of trim that. There is kind of a limit, but see that? I am kind of able to trim all that shit at fucking ridiculous sizes. That's a lot of MIDI. So I can just like highlight that stuff and just fucking put some up, down, different samples, whatever, I don't know. Then I can rewarp them out. Annoying. It's like a machine's working. Right, so you can do that with anything. Weird. Circuit bent version of Here Comes the Bride. Yeah, it's like if you decided to take a bunch of Arduinos and make your make a whole fleet, a choir of hard drives sing something, which I've seen. It's like, why do nerds do this stuff? Why do we do this stuff? What's wrong with us? Alright, so this pitch down effect is coming again from the glide effect here. Alright, so that's a direct way to just manipulate this shit. Okay, so how could we go and make some other type of sub with something other than sub? Let's use a kick. So if you've never made a sub from kick, Now is the time to learn. So again, sample and hold. Big time thing here. So I'm going to go in here, we can actually just keep this as a simpler. We want this in non-warped version. And we want to trim this all the way back. We're doing sample and hold again, so turn off snap as well. Snap always snaps to the zero crossing. So I'm going to look for just one sample here, and this is a super clipped sound, so this is actually not super ideal. Okay, I want something that's less clipped. Okay, so I'm going to get that one waveform there. So I can zoom in on that. We see the sine wave. Zoom farther. Go right to that zero crossing there. We'll trim. See, the snap values are for the computer to do it for you. But the reason why your computer does it for you is so you don't have to do that. This takes time. People don't want it to take any more than 2 seconds. So just have to do something that lasts more than 2 seconds. So we have to go and fade in and fade out at the beginning here so we can actually create that. And also be in classic mode. Okay, so now when we're in simpler, and I'm just going to trim off the higher harmonics with the filter instead of using crossfade on this one. So now we're going to tune this with this, so I'm going to go up right about there, perfect. All right, now we can get to C, so I'm going to go down 2 semitones, perfect. All right. Okay, so we got sub. That is a perfectly working sub. Okay, so we're also going to want to do the same things here. Make it mono. A little bit of attack. I like a decent amount of release on my subs. I want to be able to tap it and it sounds like that. I'm going to add a little bit of an envelope on my filter just so I can get a little bit of click. Cool. Right, so we can do this and then kind of put it in sampler or simpler and then try some FM stuff on it. But yeah, essentially you can do this from anything that has like a basic little sine wave in there. You can also do it for something a little bit more intense. Say if we like grab this one. It's also probably going to change the pitch, so we're going to have to retune it. But this one's more of like a squarish saw. So I'm literally just looking at the sample for its waveform. You only like me for my waveforms. You don't even like me for what's in the sample. Ooh. See, that one's sick as fuck because it adds so many different overtones into it. So we can try a different one like this. So that's definitely changed the pitch, but it actually sounds way more punchy. So I'm playing a C still, so that's at a B. So it went down 1 semitone and up 1 octave. so let's use portamento on this one too. Still want like punch. Also, no velocity either. But yeah, that's a really useful trick. When I'm just like designing subs and stuff like that, I'll just go and try whatever. Specifically anything that has a lower frequency content to it. So I like kicks for that. Okay, so you know, a million ways to put a sub in a sampler, but essentially that is all of them. So you know, it's like we can talk more about subs and stuff, like how to make like more specific styles of subs, like Dirty South stuff with like more overtones and all that shit. There's ways to make those specific style of subs, kind of like making a hard style kick or whatever. So we'll kind of talk about that stuff, you know, when we have time. Um, but yeah, so we've talked about a ton of different shit, mostly around this stuff. So last time we talked about isolation sampling, which kind of was, you know, uh, included with the lo-fi bass stuff. Um, but it also is applied from the resampling stuff as well. So like really what that is all about. We did the bass effects and all that shit as well. So it's kind of the end of the class here. But yeah, obviously there's like a million different ways to go about this. Um, and a million different sounds to kind of get from this. So don't feel shy about just trying anything, I guess. And you know, just get to know the samplers and what you can do with them. Essentially, though, you just want to know like the key like techniques with them, and that's like sample and hold. So sample and hold's like a staple in samplers, and synthesizers have been built around those techniques specifically. Like wavetable synthesis is built around that one concept, and sample and hold's been around way longer than that. Um, so it's just stuff to think about, stuff to kind of take with you. So we can definitely talk about granulator. So I want to talk about a granulator in the sense of like what can we do with it, what you should really be doing with it. We talked about it in the 101 as well, specifically with basses though. Um, and this is just a little bit of a gamble, me loading this up on stream. You know, just Max is just so finicky. So I guess we'll just see how it goes. But yeah, so this is kind of like when using like a synth like this or just a granular resynthesizer, um, you want to go and definitely look at that. Look at that. Just like I said, it's just beach balling. Um, thank you. They're so sweet. Thank you. Yeah, so you just want to use it as like a sound design tool. So when I say sound design tool, I mean like go and use this as a resample thing and just kind of chill like that. See you, Mary. Thanks for coming through. So yeah, so grab something again, kind of like what I was doing before, something that's a little bit interesting, something you've worked on. You can even drag full tracks into it. That can be a thing. Um, but yeah, just something that's interesting. So a lot of the like bass resample sessions I end up doing, I sometimes will just use that not even just as audio, just as something I can drop into Granulator. In theory, if it wants to let me drop stuff, I'm just gonna drop a little section just so I don't have to like deal with it being a pain. This is also super long resample, so I guess that's something to keep in mind. There it goes. All right, so the grain is going to be the loop size. So hertz is the speed, lower hertz amounts, lower grain, longer window, bigger window. So when doing this, you want to be mono. You want to kind of find an interesting spot to be around. And then, you know, just I usually just hit resample and then start recording. Especially if I'm going to, you know, just be doing random shit without a beat behind it. So like this would be, you know, first thing I do, which is bass resample, whatever. Resample. I like it. I like it. Yeah, and I can run it through mastering, processing, whatever. Just limit it. Make sure it's not like clipping. And that's chill. Record directly in my clip over here. And then just start, you know, fucking around with it. You can scan through the whole file like this with file position, click and drag. Both do the same thing. Turn on the LFO, have it scan for me. Have it scan slower. Cool one is sample and hold with this. Now this is going to change the crossfade on each of the loops, or the grain. You can add amplitude modulation to that. This will divide the time, so it's slower modulation. Right, okay, so I'm gonna speed that up back to normal. Spray is gonna be another cool one because that's gonna kind of randomize the start position between, you know, the spray amount is gonna be this kind of range that it randomly jumps to. So I'm actually gonna turn this back into something a little bit more concise. So you can see with the spray on, it kind of does what I was doing with the sample and hold over here. So I can have it go symmetrical, which is left and right from the start position, or have it go right or left. So that's what those mean. And then I can change the slope of that movement. So we'll turn off the AM now because I was making it all Geiger counter-y. That's really what it's all about for that. Eurorack people love Geiger counters because they create random impulses as well. So you can, Geiger counter will pick up radiation from anything really. So we give off radiation. Heat is radiation. So it'll kind of, you know, give you different versions of that, kind of like random little spikes. And that can be a trigger, can be all types of shit in Eurorack. Okay, then we have scan over here, which is kind of the same thing. This is now going to kind of gently scan through your sample, give you a bunch of random shit. Yeah, love that. We ran through a granule delay, give it a little space. give it some space.